One aspect that's actually important to analyze is how people in the story that were obviously biologically modified seem to be thinking of themselves as being the best. Now, it's understandable because that's why they were modified, and it doesn't cause any harm until that mentality pushes you to feel superior to everybody else. And it actually happens in the story, and we can see that when they think of something that's not biologically modified, it suddenly loses its value and it's considered as worthless. But in our society today, we're used to thinking that everybody deserves the same amount of respect. But in their scenario, everything that was not biologically modified is worthless and doesn't deserve attention. So that's when it starts to become dangerous. Because also, these people who were modified start to become their only priority is themselves. And that's not something that we want today. And that's where we see that their human nature has actually changed because their priorities are different. Their priorities are living for themselves and that their own pleasure only. Now, whenever you feel so important that you're above everybody else's level, how is it then possible to feel a sense of empathy? Now, we can make a point here that everybody is born with empathy. And we can actually make a link here with Frankenstein that we read, where the creature showed empathy with another family without ever being taught what it meant to be empathetic. But now, and obviously it's a different author, but even in this story, the author proves that point later on, and I'm gonna cover that later. But what's important here is that when you feel that you're so important that no one can reach your level, how is it possible to look somebody else in the eye and tell them, I understand what you're feeling and what you're going through? That's not possible anymore because to be empathetic, you need to come down from the level you think you're at and get on the same level as the person you're talking to, right? But how is it possible if you think that everybody around you is inferior? I don't think it is, and I think that the author is actually trying to prove a point here that what constitutes the human nature, empathy, and it's actually a big part of it, is actually disappearing because of the fact that we think we're so important. And that's what we have to pay attention to in this story, and it's shown multiple times that the sense of empathy is lost. The first quote that I found relates to how these biologically modified people think that they're superior to everybody else. And it's on page 55, and it goes like this: we can eat anything, we're on top of the food chain. Now, this quote is interesting because we see them, we're like, okay, they're better at what they can do. They can heal super quickly, they're more efficient in their work, but we see that they can also eat anything that they like. And this makes sense actually because if we look at the food chain, whatever's on top is usually associated with whatever species is more powerful. And that's actually the case here. They think they're super powerful and they have good reason to believe that. But like we said before, the issue comes when you think that you're better and superior to everybody else and the others don't have as much value as you do. But again, it's just interesting to see the connection between how they can eat anything that they want and the power and the actual strength that they have compared to everybody else. Now, on page 66, there's a quote saying, it sure can make you think, if someone came from the past to meet us here and now, what do you think they'd say about us? Would they even call us human? And Lisa answers, no, they'd call us gods. So now, it's interesting because they're not ashamed of what they are. They're openly saying that we don't want to be associated to regular human beings. We like what we are, even though we think we're superior, we think we're more important. Doesn't matter. The point is, we're perfect, and we don't want to be associated with being a simple human because that would bring us a level down. And it's quite interesting, I believe, because usually when we think of ourselves as superior, if that's the case in any part of our lives, we don't usually say it. We like to be humble about it, but then they really firmly believe that nothing can go up to their level. So that's an interesting quote. And then on page 62, we see the quote. The author is quoting an imaginary author that writes, cut me, I won't bleed. Gas me, I won't breathe. Stab me, shoot me, slash me, smash me. I have swallowed science, I am God alone. So now, this is clearly written as a critique of biotechnology and their use of it, because not only can we infer from the situation the author's opinion, but we can see it clearly written black on white. He says, sure, cut me, I won't bleed. Harm me, I won't feel pain. But he says, I am God, I reached perfection. But then he says, I'm alone. And that's the difference that we need to make. That's where we see that it's actually a critique of biotechnology. And even though it makes us so much better and we think we live much better lives, at the end of the day, we're just so much more alone at the same time. And it's important to realize. And that shows the contrast between us and, well, us. We, as humans nowadays, we rely on each other, right? We have friends, we have families. But them, they're so good at everything. They're so perfect that they don't need anybody else. They don't need to share how they feel. They don't need to share their failures or anything else. They're perfect at what they do. So it's sad to see that they lost that sense of bonding with other people. And that's what the author was trying to point out here. So here we clearly see what differentiates us from these biologically modified humans. Because for us, it seems so logical, right? That we need other people. We need moral support. We need to be able to form bonds of trust, of friendship with friends, family. We need other people. It's part of our human nature. And then in this story, we see the complete opposite, where human beings are just so perfect that they don't need anybody else. And it's quite shocking. It's mind-blowing because, again, it's supposed to be part of our human nature to reach out to other people. And that's not what we see here. And that's what the author, I'm sure, is trying to criticize. Now, if we move on to the subject of empathy, that the feeling of superiority causes, we have a quote on page 58, and the friends are talking about the dog. They're saying, we were going to slag it, but Banbam wouldn't let us. Mosharraf, the biologist, eyed her. How restrained of you, Lisa shrugged. Orders. Still, I'm sure your thermal surge weapon presented a powerful temptation. How good of you not to slag a starving animal. Alright, so this is clearly sarcasm on the biologist's part. Because even though, well, it's quite surprising because he's living in that time period where they all think the same way. And he still has compassion for an animal. But it does make sense that this mentality has probably helped him become a biologist. But we even see in this story, they told us that there are only a handful of biologists left. So we see that among the entire population, most of them aren't compassionate as the biologist. And what's quite shocking as well is that even this biologist who feels for the animal, for that poor dog, doesn't care enough to take him under his wing to actually care for him, because he tells them you could eat it. I can't take it. It's too much of a big deal for me. The only thing he was interested about really was taking his DNA and be able to conduct more research on it. But he was more interested. So he was more interested in researching the animal than in actually taking care of him. So we see that even the ones who care the most don't really care. So clearly, that part of humanity, that is empathy, has disappeared over time because of the science that has made them so perfect. So the last issue that I want to address here is the one that I actually mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the one about empathy. Is it something we're born with, or is it something that is developed? Because if it's something that we're born with, it would mean that it actually is a significant part of our human nature. And the author actually seems to be on that side, the one that says, yes, we're born with a sense of empathy, and that's what makes us human. So, here in this quote, we're speaking about the main character who says, I looked down at the dog, a massive, panting, trusting animal. I still don't think we should do it, speaking about killing the dog. What good does it do? He answers, it makes you smile. So, here what's interesting is that even though this person has grown in a society where compassion isn't one of the most important things and isn't valued as much because it has disappeared for all the reasons that we mentioned before, it still is a part of him. So, what I believe happened is that because of all the modifications that he went through and the society that he lives in, he has been influenced to ignore that part of him that makes him human. Because changing the human nature is very hard, and I don't think you can easily take out a part that makes you human, you know? But you can actually instead much more easily just ignore that part of you, and that's what I think happened. Because he seems to care about the dog and not want to kill it. And I just think that it's an example of it just shows a clear contrast between what we are today and what their society has led them to become, because we love dogs. Well, a lot of people do, and sadly in this story they don't seem to value it for the simple reason that it hasn't been modified. So I just think that what happened is that they knew that the dog brought them happiness. They just didn't take the chance to realize it. And honestly, I think that that's the reason why they actually kept the dog for so long. Because why didn't they get rid of it right away? Well, I think it's because it brought them happiness. It brought them joy. They just didn't acknowledge it fully, and that's why when the dog became too much of a burden, they decided to eat it, which is sad, but just shows how society has shaped them to ignore that part of their humanity. So yes, my overall understanding of this story is that your your human nature can actually be modified because of biotechnology. If you modify yourself, your human nature will be modified. But your feelings and the values that you hold in your heart won't be completely removed. You'll just be more prone to ignore them. So what I would say overall is that the author's message is to simply forget not to be human. Whatever you do, just keep your values close to you, never keep sight of them, and keep being you. Because if you use science to manipulate what you're gonna look like, to manipulate what your kids are gonna look like, to manipulate your thoughts, well, obviously it's gonna have an impact on you and you're going to end up losing yourself. So, my take on this story and the message that I think the author was trying to get through very simply is to not forget that overall you're human and you need to keep your values close to your heart. Thank you.